Just setting up at the moment, letting a few people in. Good morning.
Hey, good morning to you.
And I'll put a message on the chat. All right, we might kick off. So, great. Good morning, or good afternoon. Welcome to another episode of Data Futurology. Thank you so much for joining us. As you know, in Data Futurology, we talk about the leadership and strategy components that are relevant for leaders in machine learning, data science, and AI. And today, we're going to be talking about commercializing your ideas, what type of IP, intellectual property strategy you should have behind that. What does it take to take new ideas to market? And I know it's a really important area that a lot of people have been asking us to cover, and it's something where Kevin and I were discussing before. The companies that are less sophisticated are thinking about it too late. Generally, sort of more sophisticated companies are thinking about it early. There's a lot of questions and possibly a lot of fog for people in the data science space around this particular topic. So today we wanted to cover it all and make sure that we get your questions in. For that, we're joined by Kevin Buckley. He's the founder at Torrey Pines Law Group. Kevin, thank you so much for joining us. How are you doing today?
Doing well. I hope that you weren't too addicted to the Facebook news feed, because I understand you don't have it anymore.
Yeah, basically, right?
So thanks for creating this forum again, and glad to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And definitely discussing the IP strategy, or the place that IP strategy has in life sciences and AI. It's such a big topic. I was wondering if we could start right at the top, maybe with the commercialization process. And from your experience, how have you seen that play out for companies in this space?
Yeah, okay. So IP, as you can imagine, is one of the first things that we counsel our clients to focus on. And as part of the commercialization process, it is essential that you have solid IP protection to get to market. You're not going to get the investment, you're not going to be acquired, and you're certainly not going to be able to license something that you don't have. So the way that we think of the commercialization process is just after conception. We focus on IP, and I tend to focus on 5 different buckets a lot. So the commercialization process for our clients, we describe it in the sense of IP, licensing, which can include freedom to operate analysis, in and out licensing of inventions. Then you focus on the funding aspect. How do you get money to support this IP procurement, the licensing regime? Do you know if something is overfunded or underfunded in the market? If it's underfunded, you're probably going to get a higher chance of getting an investment. If it's overfunded, well, you have more competition there. 4th bucket is regulatory, and that's really important. In the United States, we also include reimbursement in that. Essentially, the federal government and insurance companies working with the innovator to get their product paid for. And then finally, the post-market aspects of this. This is mostly litigation avoidance, but it could also include follow-on safety and efficacy studies related to the regulatory process, and any number of transactions that would occur after your product is on the market. So that, in a nutshell, those 5 buckets are what we focus on with our clients. IP is first and foremost.
I love it, and we might start there. And yeah, I really like that there's the different stages for us to dive into. So let's start with IP, and if you can tell me about sort of IP in general in this space, and then we can take it from there.
Okay, so IP does not exist in a vacuum. That's what law professors love to say.
Mm-hmm.
IP affects so many different other areas of law and business and science to some degree, but also different laws, business and science also impact IP law. So it is completely integrated with every other facet of law. So luckily, what we've done for our clients in the recent past, we have utilized a number of different legal strategies to get, let's just say, for example, Series ABC investment funding, 510K approvals, PMA approvals, or I should say clearances in the United States for medical devices,
Mm-hmm.
especially software as a medical device.
Yes.
Right? And so SAMD is an important thing to focus on. And this is really the bread and butter when we work for data scientists.
Yeah.
So the IP itself can be characterized in a number of ways. And really importantly, you have to decide early on whether you want to patent something,
Mm-hmm.
which eventually publishes, and then you go through a negotiation with a patent examiner, and then hopefully, eventually, you get an issued patent. Okay, that's great, and you can protect your invention for a total of 20 or 21 years, depending on what strategy you follow. But the real question is, if you're going to enforce a patent,
Mm-hmm.
you need to be able to detect the infringement of it.
Yeah.
Well, if you're not
Because
going to
it's up to the organization that's submits the patent to then enforce it, right?
That's right. That's the value of it. And to think about investors and acquirers, that's the value to them. Can they
Mm-hmm.
either get rights to or purchase a patent that they can then enforce? So that's really the value. Well, let's just say if you've got a patent on something that you can't detect the infringement of,
Yeah.
well, why get a patent in the first place? Maybe keep it trade secret.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe keep it know-how, which is a bit different than trade secret, or maybe it's a small subset of trade secret law. So early on, you need to decide, what do you want to do? If you've got something like a score, a ranking system, some kind of um, indication that an end user can perceive. And as a data scientist, you know that can be contouring an anomaly on an image.
Mm-hmm.
It could be a score, a discrete number provided to an end user. It can be a listing or ranking of things provided to the end user. These are things, because an end user is able to view it or use it, you can detect the infringement if you get a claim to it. If this is something, however, that is on a back-end server, it's on the cloud,
Mm-hmm.
it just is something on the back end that is your engine, but doesn't necessarily provide an output, you might consider keeping that a trade secret.
Mm.
Nobody will really be able to um, see what you're doing on the back end. Uh, they'll eventually see a product of some level, but that process you might not want to patent. You might want to keep it on the back end, keep it unpublished, and you could protect it forever if you really think about that.
Yeah.
The real double-edged sword is if somebody patents that algorithm or the network or some kind of a process, they can patent it around you. That's
Mm-hmm.
unlikely for most of our clients, but that is kind of the trade-off. Do you patent, have it publish, and get something that has a finite 20 or 21 year limited lifetime? Or do you have a trade secret that could have perpetual
Mm.
lifetime of enforcement so long as you have all the confidentiality and employment agreements in place? That's really the IP decision you need to make very early on. So if you want me to get into the patent process, I can do that too. That's complex.
That's really interesting. I did want to ask if you had any examples that you could share about, and obviously to only to the detail that you can share. I guess that's hopefully needless to say. But if you can share about organizations that went one way and then another organization that went the other way with this decision around their IP.
Sure. So in fact, well, I can give you an example of one client doing both things. So,
Mm-hmm.
because this is pretty interesting. One of the clients we have, so we've assisted one client for many years, and we started developing their IP portfolio. That IP portfolio then eventually led in time to getting regulatory approval. So 510K de novo pathway in the United States. And the technology relates to detecting anomalies in medical images. And those anomalies can be any number of things. For instance, one of the anomalies can be cancer. So a cancerous lesion or tumor in the image itself. So you can imagine that if the user of this SAMD, software as a medical device, is seeing a contour on the image circling the anomaly, well, that physician might take a closer look at that circle, or in this case, a score, a number, 0 out of 100, 100 being really suspicious, 0 not being very suspicious at all, or both the contour and that number, and just take a quick look at it. Maybe that is something that is indicative of cancer in the patient. So this is something that we've patented. We have a claim to not only a system for contouring the anomaly, but a system for providing the output of the score, as well as methods of diagnosing utilizing the contouring and scoring aspect of the SAMD. So that was a great, and so this company that we've been helping for so many years, they can detect the infringement of that with any number of their competitors.
Yeah.
So that's a really interesting example on how to patent or when to patent. Then on the trade secret end, there are algorithms. So you can imagine that many of our clients that are data-driven, they focus on inputs, an engine, and then outputs. Sometimes there really is no output. Sometimes the engine itself is where the value is in a certain system. Doesn't necessarily generate any output that is detectable that you would file a patent claim on, but it's something that does something very valuable. We've kept that, or we've advised the client to keep the discrete system that is the engine. And what it does is provides, it integrates a variety of combinations of data sets. There are pre-processing steps of those data, and that is essentially chewed on by a deep learning algo, which does something which eventually provides output.
Yeah, but not directly, right? Yeah, that's
exactly. Not directly. And it's a fascinating engine that this client has developed, novel and non-obvious, but because you can't detect the infringement of it, they're going to keep it a trade secret. And it's a highly valuable part of their business plan. So that's kind of an idea of generally where we go with our clients in this field.
That's fantastic. Yes, because then in the second example, because the algorithm is not interacting directly with customers and not showing the outputs directly, then it can definitely stay hidden in quite valuable. It can be worked on That's really really interesting. I'm fascinated about your experience also on software as a medical device, on telehealth. I really like the fact that you're in that space. I find it fascinating. In the case of your first example with the contouring and the scoring in the imaging, so to what extent can that can that stop from other people from doing something similar? So if a competitor came up with a contouring or their own score, where is the line of not only protection but the line where this organization should act on their patent?
Yeah, well, that second part of that question is really complex. A lot of that has to do with resources.
Mm-hmm.
You can imagine litigation and enforcing the patents is an entirely separate question, and it's an integral part of a very expensive business strategy.
Mm-hmm.
That's really where it is. With respect to the patent claiming question, the answer goes to how broad you can claim the invention.
Yeah.
So the laws in all of the countries where we file patent applications, all of these countries have different laws, and all of these countries have different regulations. So you can imagine that. So in the United States, there's a famous case called the Alice case.
Mm-hmm.
And this is I believe, a 2014 decision by the US Supreme Court. And it really narrowed what was patent eligible. So, okay, your audience might not even know. And sometimes I get confused.
Yep.
It's probably a good idea to talk about what is patenting and how do you do it. So again, 5 buckets. I don't know why I do this. Maybe it goes back to my adjunct professor days in university. But getting a patent requires 5 different things. Here are my 5 buckets for getting a patent. So patent eligibility. Is this invention patentable at all?
Yeah.
So maybe the best way to answer that question is, what isn't patent eligible?
Mm-hmm.
So a mathematical formula is not patent eligible. A product of nature, a plant, for example, that it is existing in nature, is not patent eligible. I mean, you can imagine a lot of things that aren't patent eligible. Okay, so get something in a patent application that is patent eligible. That's bucket 1. Novelty. Every issued patent has to be new. And if there's any reference prior to the filing of your patent application that is essentially exactly what you're claiming, well, then that claim isn't novel. You're going to have to do something with that claim to make it novel. You're going to have to work around that reference. Third thing is you have to be not obvious. So even if you're novel, you have to be not obvious. And in the United States, that means an examiner can combine 2 or more references and say, hey, if you're claiming, and I just heard this analogy recently, if you're claiming a man wearing a shirt and pants, okay, well, one reference has a man with a shirt on, but not necessarily pants. Okay, there's one reference. Then the examiner says, well, this guy in another magazine, this man's wearing pants. Well, the examiner can say, well, this man wearing a shirt and this man wearing a pants, we can cite those against this claim that you're filing a patent application surrounding. And it's obvious. It's obvious. You cannot claim a man wearing a shirt and pants because one of skill in the art would have put those references together.
Yeah.
Okay. So you have to go over multiple references, and that becomes kind of a cat and mouse game. It's really a game. And then the 4th and 5th buckets are a bit more challenging. Enablement is number 4.
Mm-hmm.
Possession of the invention is number 5.
Mm-hmm.
Enablement is, are you teaching one of skill in the art how to make and use the invention without undue experimentation? So it's a drafting problem. And you have to, in your patent application, show that to get a patent. The 5th thing, possession of the invention. if you're claiming the sun, the moon, the earth, and the stars, you're not going to get a patent on it. So you have to show within the specification of the patent itself. So the first 50 pages of a patent application, if it's provided in those first 50 pages, the claim has to go back to that somewhere. You have to show that you are in possession of that claimed invention. In other words, the claims have to relate to the specification. So that's a second drafting problem. So those are the 5 buckets. But to really answer your question on, how broadly can you claim these things? First of all, you have to be within patent eligibility.
Yeah.
Then, if you're claiming, and this is really critical, if you're claiming a technical solution to a technical problem, you're most likely going to get an issued claim.
Yep.
If you're claiming something that a human being could do on his own or her own without computational power, without multiple CPUs, without multiple GPUs, if you're claiming something like a business method or an algorithm for creating some output based on various input, well, if a human mind can do that, or if a person can do that with their hands, you're probably not going to get an issued patent claim in the United States. Europe, on the other hand, you have a shot. You have a better shot even in Australia.
Yeah.
So it is really a patchwork of laws and regulations. Really hard to get a patent related to software in the United States. Surprisingly, it's a bit easier in Europe based on this Alice decision, which really clamped down on things in the United States. And then it's just a patchwork of laws and regs throughout the world. So the strategy of when to sue or not to sue, above and beyond the money and the resources, is what is the scope of your claim? If you've got a broad claim in Japan, sue as many people as you can if you can afford it.
Yeah.
If you've got a narrow claim in the United States, well, how many people are infringing? You've got to do that calculus when you're filing for the patent itself from the very beginning. But then also you have to figure out, if you've got a relatively narrow claim, how much money are you willing to put into this with the risk of losing your patent infringement case? Patent infringement cases are millions of dollars.
And before we move onto licensing and funding, which I'm really curious about, I wanted to ask you about the point that you made about if somebody can do it with their hands, then it's unlikely to get a patent. How does that work in the case of the imaging? So the detection of cancer in an image, where and the reason why I ask is thinking about the fact, and obviously this happens a lot in data science and AI, where somebody can do the work for 1 image, 10 images, 100 images. They can do that by hand, and obviously in this case, a specialist would detect at least most of the cancer in the images. The AI definitely creates a standardized approach, and ideally combining the knowledge of multiple experts. But is there an argument to say an expert could do this by hand, sort of one at a time?
Yeah, and that's the fight we often have. So you can imagine that, the medical image. And an analogy is any large data set. You can imagine that a medical image can be a 2-dimensional image, which is high res or low res X-ray. So a number of pixels per square inch or per square area, depending on where your audience is. You could also have a 3-dimensional layering of medical images. And you can imagine that the number of pixels or voxels that you're looking at is something that machine learning and deep learning are very good at. They're very good at modeling and providing an output based on the analysis, the DL or ML analysis of those pixels or voxels. But if you're getting into, so the analogy can be extended. So any data set where you're combining, let's just say you combine the medical image with additional data. Let's just say you're looking at genomics. So you have DNA associated with a certain patient, you have a medical image associated with the same patient, and you go on and on and on. So you're looking at genotype and phenotype, which is the medical image related to a man or a woman? How old is the man or the woman? And where is the man or woman from? Is this a Japanese man, or is this a South African woman? You can imagine that the algorithm is going to be looking at image, genotype, phenotype, and combining those different data in a way which is probably unpredictable. So you can have a physician look at any number of things, but to combine them is exceedingly difficult. So I don't think you would find many physicians able to read a medical image, do the genomic analysis, and combine that with some kind of a trained algo to generate that kind of output that really does require a computer, some kind of technical feature to provide that output. So if you're looking at a data set of 100 things, whatever that is, you can do that by hand. And so you're probably not going to get an issued patent claim if you're limiting that claim, or maybe the best way to look at it, if it's so broad that the technical feature can include doing it by hand. So you really need to narrow these claims to something which is computer implemented for sure, but also needs that horsepower to generate the output. That's really where we focus our claims with our clients, and that is successful throughout the world. And it's interesting, the harmonization now, and it's totally unintentional, but this technical solution to a technical problem, you got to be technical. So you can't use your hands, you can't type something in, do it in your head to have that technical solution. You have to have the horsepower, the technical horsepower, and this really did start in Europe and is now getting implemented, again, totally inadvertently in the United States. We're focused on technical solutions to technical problems.
Interesting. That is really, really interesting. I love the fact that in the combination is one of the key parts, that it's more than what I guess one person could reasonably do in a reasonable amount of time. That's great. So let's go onto licensing. Could you tell me about your thoughts, perspective on licensing, and then we can touch on funding?
Yeah, absolutely. So the licensing aspect of the commercialization process, it's really fun because, of course, you have some IP already generated. So either you've protected something by way of patenting it, or you have a trade secret protected, some kind of know-how. Well, the licensing aspect, it works hand in hand, as you can imagine, with IP. Typically what we do is we find out if our clients need to in-license something that is blocking our client from getting a patent claim issued or an invention marketed. So you can imagine that getting patent claims is kind of like a wedding cake. So the oldest claim would be at the bottom big layer of a wedding cake. Our clients might come in and have narrower claims, but they are improvements on that foundational layer of the wedding cake. And you can imagine that as competitors continue to generate more and more improvements, narrower and narrower claims, Well, at the top of the wedding cake is a super specific invention. It's narrower, but it relies on the
Yeah.
broader basis of the wedding cake below. To be able to market and commercialize that narrow patent on top, you got to get a license to something below it.
Mhm.
So let's
Mhm.
just say somebody that precedes you has a very broad patent claim, and that's the bottom layer of the wedding cake. Well, if you're all the way up on top, you might have to find who owns the claims that you would be infringing by marketing your narrow patent claim, that invention which is claimed in that very narrow claim.
Yeah.
So you need licenses to everything below you.
Mm.
So that's really the first analysis that we do. The interesting part about this, I think, is when you really wrap this into the regulatory environment. Let's just say you're going to go into an abbreviated regulatory pathway, and you are going to be relying on somebody else's safety and efficacy data so that you get either cleared or approved by the FDA or the equivalent of the FDA throughout the world. Well, typically, if you're going to rely on somebody else's safety and efficacy data,
Mm.
they pretty typically have a patent out there that covers it. And you're going to have to rely on that for as a predicate device so that you can get cleared or approved in the FDA or its worldwide equivalents. So
Mhm.
not only are you looking at licensing kind of, okay, well, what do I have to get in so that I can use my invention without infringing somebody? But in the regulatory space, well, if I'm going to be using somebody else's patented invention as a predicate, do I want to do I want to go down that regulatory pathway where the first sale I make after it's approved, I'm infringing somebody's patent on the predicate device? Well, that's bad form. So you want to take a look, not only am I infringing somebody, do I need to get a license for that patent, but how do I avoid stepping on people's toes in the regulatory process as well? All right, that's the defensive way to look at licensing. The offensive way is, okay, now I've got this patent or I've got a patent pending invention. How am I going to leverage that and seek royalties or licensing fees from
Mhm.
parties that want to utilize my technology? Okay,
Yeah.
assuming that you have freedom to operate, you've gotten all the licenses, and you can sub-license the inventions if you are going to be infringing them, and you get a license to them. Can you extract value from collaborators or other third parties to get royalties?
Mhm.
So the broader the claims you get in your patent application, the more valuable it is from a licensing perspective. So you can imagine that all of these license agreements, non-exclusive, exclusive, worldwide, or isolated by country, or cut up by field, there are any number of ways to skin that cat, but that's from an offensive strategy. So what we typically do is we guide our clients on looking at what needs to be in licensed and what can be out licensed, and how to maximize the value both incoming and outgoing.
That's great. That is great. That's a really handy way to look at it. And I think, yeah, a lot of people working in data science should really consider this, because I think a lot of times we possibly don't give ourselves enough credit, maybe in terms of we think, oh, this is all open source. I'm just using what's out there, but there's a lot of innovation that happens in the solving of the problems, which could be a good candidate for a patent.
Well, here's really kind of the touchstone. If anybody in your audience is going to be patenting something, and they're going to seek a license or be acquired or seek an investment,
Mm.
what you don't want to do, you don't want an investor, a potential investor, to identify a patent which you haven't considered, and they say, "Hey, have you considered this patent? Are you infringing that or not?"
Mm. Mm.
Well, if you're getting that question from an investor or a potential investor, you're already starting off on the wrong foot.
Yeah.
You need to identify whether you have freedom to operate, whether you need a license to actually be able to fully market your invention. You don't want to get caught flat-footed, and you certainly don't want a potential investor to identify something for you and surprise you. That's
That,
really bad.
that's a pro tip right there. Yeah, do your homework.
Your homework.
Tell me about the funding perspective. I was curious to hear the perspectives of overfunding and underfunding. But if we can start with your general thoughts on funding.
Yeah, so we've had really good fortune to have worked with investors. Some of these people are, say, a wealthy physician or a wealthy businessman, an individual, all the way up to multi-billion-dollar venture funds. And you can imagine that everybody within that spectrum of small to big, they operate very differently. A seed investor, pre-seed investor, angel investor. There's any number of ways to say that. The small investor, they look at things as an investment to grow tenfold, hopefully, something that they don't really expect to see a success rate more than 1 in 10. So they might put 10 bets down and they want to see one of them succeed. The more institutional investors, they take a much broader approach, and those investors are looking to fit in the different pieces of a puzzle. So if they can invest in or get rights to a piece of the puzzle that fits everything together, and they can corner that whole market on that 100-piece puzzle. And if anybody in the audience is puzzle piece number 100 out of 100, the investor has consolidated all 99 pieces, and you're the last piece to put in to corner the market, well, you're a very valuable investment. This is what you want to find out. You want to be able to do some a bit of an analysis to figure out where you are in the puzzle, where you are in a certain process, a stream for an investment. And if you're talking to pre-seed, seed, angel, you're probably not going to see much of a pattern. You're going to see more of a shotgun approach, and you're not going to be able to glean where that investor might be strategically collecting their investments and seeing maybe a bigger value based on that shotgun. But the more on the other end of the spectrum, you can find out what certain investors have in their portfolio already. If they are focused on something like the intersection of artificial intelligence and drug development. Well, you can see that if they have, go to Crunchbase or go to, there are any number of websites or organizations that list what they've found as Series A, B, or C investment funding. See if a certain investor is investing in a certain field, a certain technology, or a certain sector. If they're getting into some kind of, in this hypothetical, developing drugs using AI, if they've already got a lot of the basic AI, the deep learning, machine learning, all the nets through their investments, maybe they're looking for something else. Maybe it's computer vision. Maybe it's 3D modeling, which is the sweet spot for that investor. You can find that out. And that is really where I'm getting to. If something is underinvested, you're that last piece of the puzzle. You're valuable. You want to find out, using your own due diligence, how to approach the investor. But if you're finding that 20 different investors are already investing in 20 different competitors and it's super crowded, well, you're not going to get as much of an investment, if at all. So that's really that's where we approach it so far as investment. The rest of it is due diligence, and it's
Yeah.
based on steps 1 and 2, buckets 1 and 2.
Mm-hmm.
If you're not passing IP due diligence, if you're not passing the FTO and all of the in licensing, out licensing due diligence, and then we'll talk about regulatory. But if you don't have regulatory due diligence totally captured, you're probably not going to get a good investment.
Yeah.
So that's just how we tackle that.
Well, I like that the perspective that you bring. I think is externally focused in terms of when people are developing the new technologies, they tend to be inwardly focused, trying to solve the problems that they're trying to tackle, but considering their value from the perspective of the investor and what puzzle piece there would be. It's such an important step and something that's easily overlooked for the people that are in the solving the problem. So I think it's a fantastic advice. Tell me about the regulatory perspective.
Yeah, and this is, again, this is all very complex, but you can summarize it in a couple of different ways. If you're SAMD, let's just talk about medical device clearances. There are generally 2 approaches. One is an abbreviated pathway, 510K in the United States, or 510K de novo. You can, add on breakthrough designation if you want to do that. The other is PMA, pre-market approval, very expensive.
Mm-hmm.
One pathway, the first pathway, is reliant on somebody else's safety and efficacy data, mostly safety. You have to generally prove that you're effective, but you can piggyback on other people's data. That's really where 510K generally goes. The other part, if you don't have any safety or efficacy data, you're more likely to go PMA, pre-market approval, where you have to generate your own safety and efficacy data. Very expensive. You're going to have to create you're going to have to join the ecosystem of contract researchers and contract manufacturers to really generate that safety and efficacy data to get PMA.
Yeah.
And then you're looking at the difference between class 1, 2, and 3 devices. So you can imagine the more you're impacting a subject's or patient's safety, the harder it is going to be to get through the FDA and its worldwide equivalents. So one of the first thing is, and again, this approach, all these buckets are interrelated. So you can imagine that if you're going to go 510K, there's some predicate out there or something near you that you can piggyback off of. You can kind of mirror yourself against it and make a comparison and make sure that the safety and efficacy data that has been created previously is relevant to your device. You can imagine that, so we already talked about, you don't want to be infringing the patent holder for the predicate device based on your first sale. Okay, so choose a good predicate. That's advice number 1. But also, if you've got safety and efficacy data for a 510K, does that data not also enable potentially your invention? If somebody has already greased the skids for your invention and you're improving on somebody else's safety and efficacy, why not throw that into the patent application as well? If somebody has already proved that a related device that you're improving upon is effective, well, that's a great thing to put into a patent application because it helps with enablement. It helps with possession of the invention if you're claiming an improvement on that predicate. So it also goes to the licensing. So if you're already looking at safety and efficacy data for the regulatory approval, well, look for the patent that covers that device that's both safe and effective. And that is something that you want to consider whether you need to in-license or not. So everything works together. PMA is interesting because you're saying you're new.
Yeah.
But think about this. you want to be new as possible from the patent perspective, but you don't want to be so incredibly crazy new that you're not safe and not effective. I
Yeah.
mean, you
Yeah.
don't want the FDA to look at this and wait, that's too new,
Yeah.
right? So there's this crazy. It's a game. So Felipe, this is another game.
Yeah.
You have to really balance how new you want to be.
Hmm.
You want to be just new enough to get a patent issued, to be novel.
Hmm.
You don't want to be so new that the FDA is going to look at you like you're nuts. So you really have to balance it, and you have to talk the same language. So
Hmm.
the pre-sub, all of the submissions that you're making with the FDA and its equivalents, it can't be so disparate from what you're providing in other writing, including a patent application or a patent. They have to be linked in a certain way. And that's what a lot of startup companies and even a lot of attorneys, they don't put that together.
Yeah.
And so really advice number 2 with respect to regulatory is make sure you're new, but not crazy new.
Yeah.
Just sync it up. Make sure you're new enough to get that patent, but not so new that the FDA considers you crazy.
Hmm. Yeah. That is a another pro tip.
Yeah,
um,
it's
yeah.
tough stuff. This is really
Right.
complex.
Yeah, no, you really need to know the landscape and what's happening and where things are at, and find your niche. This is awesome. This is awesome. Tell me about the post market aspect.
Yeah, so there are a lot of different aspects of this. So you can imagine that if you are having to do some vigilance, let's just
Mhm.
say you're on the market, so you've gotten your patent, the patent claims cover the invention that is on the market. You've gotten all the licenses you need to have, so you're not infringing your competitors, and you have freedom to operate on the market. You've gotten the regulatory approval and all the resources you need to label and market a product. Well, there could be some vigilance steps
Mhm.
that you need to follow up with respect to safety. So you can imagine in this space, sometimes there are resellers, there are distributors. If
Mhm.
you're going to go worldwide,
Yeah.
you can imagine that the vigilance in, say, Japan or Korea, they
Mhm.
have very tight standards on how you can market and sell SAMD or any device
Mhm.
for that matter, um, versus some other country that's more relaxed. And I can't think of a good example. Maybe the United States. Maybe that's a good example. It's a bit more relaxed than Japan and Korea. Not much, but a bit more relaxed. Well, you want to make sure that if the vigilance, let's just say there's a recall in the United States, well, who's going to tell the Japanese that?
Yeah.
So, okay, that's a post-market consideration. How do you share data once something is on the market? It could relate to safety. It could relate to other important things. And let's just say that we discussed earlier, patent claims have different scope in each country because
Yeah.
every country's laws and regs are just different. So
Mhm.
let's just say that you're just fine in China because you've got a very broad claim in China and you're able to enforce the patent in China, and you're keeping the infringers at bay. However, we discussed in the United States, you're probably going to get a narrower claim on the same invention.
Mhm.
Well, you got a bunch of competitors that are going to be working around the invention in the United States because the claims are narrower.
Yeah.
If that competitor in the United States started selling it in China, well, they're probably infringing the patent in China.
Mhm.
So you've got to just figure out the patchwork and the scope of each of these claims throughout the world, figure out your litigation and defensive strategy based on that patchwork of patent claims. Another thing is product liability. So in the United States, we tend to sue somebody else for anything at any time we want to. somebody breathed on me. I'm suing you for breathing on me. That's an assault. I mean, it can be crazy here in the United States, but maybe less so in China or Japan or Australia, for that matter. So you can imagine that if somebody is put on notice in the United States, whereby a certain part or a certain component or the way that output is being generated in a certain way with these inventions, if there is some liability in the United States associated with that output, with that SAMD product, well, maybe that impacts Australia. Maybe if there are different laws and regulations that need to be analyzed with respect to the liability in Australia, in this hypothetical, for selling that product, that's got to be looked at as well. So post-market strategy is a lot about litigation. It's a lot about sharing data. It's a lot, in fact, it's mostly about litigation avoidance.
Yeah.
So it's about communication throughout the world, how you're going to be doing things differently in each country. And that, again, is complex.
100%. So complex. And I am so impressed and so grateful that you've been able to summarize and simplify such a complex topic for us. I have one last question. I know that we're a little bit over time, but I wanted to ask you about the some of the more interesting applications that you're seeing in your space, or anything that you would like to see. Because, and the reason why I ask is because, as we're discussing, software as a medical device, telehealth, like it was, an area of such growth as a result of the pandemic, and you're right in the midst of it. So, is there anything that has been really exciting for you, really different, or anything that you would like to see?
Well, the coolest thing that I've seen is AlphaFold.
Yeah.
I mean, isn't that insane? I mean, so I've done a lot of work with brilliant scientists who some of them took decades to generate three-dimensional structures of proteins. And now you've got Google, or was it DeepMind, I think, coming out with an algo within a minute or two. It'll take a linear sequence of an amino acid or a polypeptide, and instantly in 3 dimensions fold it up. So now you can do drug discovery. You can do 3-dimensional modeling of all of these ways that that folded protein might interact with other proteins in the human body. That's insane. So that's the coolest thing I've seen in years. I cannot believe that with all of this data and with this algo, whatever Google's doing, that's insane. Super impressive. Then the other thing that I'm seeing, and again, because I focus on life sciences and healthcare, you can imagine that the data, the patient data, it's really hard to come by. And this is one of the this fits into the licensing bucket. How do you get this patient data? And then on top of that, how do you protect the privacy of those patients?
Yes.
And how do you protect the privacy of those patients in each different country? GDPR in Europe, HIPAA in the United States, and every country has different privacy regs depending on what so personally identifiable information, PII, or protected health information, PHI. That's how we talk about it in the United States. It's crazy. The regs on that are just insane to get through. So you can imagine with the difficulty of getting that data and trying to protect that data and utilize that in your algo and try to exclude your competition for utilizing that patient data in a similar way. What we're finding is our clients are using smaller and smaller data sets or different combinations of smaller data sets to generate better output. And so what that does is it's requiring, I mean, here's the technical solution to the technical problem from the patent side. You're finding different ways of meshing the or stitching together the different data sets. You're looking at different ways of pre-processing that data so it can be utilized in the engine a bit differently, hopefully in a novel and non-obvious way if you want to get a patent. Maybe there's some post-processing steps. Maybe there are a number of different ways where you can generate output. But really, it's based on smaller and smaller data sets, which are requiring your algos to be essentially much more sensitive and much more specific.
Yeah.
You based on smaller data sets, you're having a higher likelihood of generating false positives and false negatives, which you want to reduce, of course. But newer algos are being developed and new engines which combine these data in novel ways. That's what we're seeing. And it's the data is getting smaller and smaller. The correlations amongst all the data are more and more brilliant. The inventors are amazing. They have amazing minds. And that's where we're seeing things going, which is great for patentability and getting, enhanced valuations, better licensing fees and better royalties. But as I said, here's the double-edged sword. The newer you are, the harder for regulatory it is. So that's where we're seeing it going. Better patentable stuff, but harder to get through regulatory. And that's just where it's just going to get worse and worse from reg, and it's going to get better and better for patentability.
Yeah, 100%. I love that perspective, and a lot of what you described. I identify strongly with in terms of in my day job, I'm using AI in healthcare and around the patient data, the privacy, combining different data sets, working with less data, thinking about what is new and what's novel, what's protected, what can be protected. Man, this has been outstanding. I can't thank you enough for sharing your perspective, for opening our eyes to everything else that we should be considering outside of the problem solving. It's how do we take this to the world and make it a reality. Kevin, thank you so much for your time. It was a blast.
Thank you, Felipe, and again, thank you for creating this forum. It's totally cool. Love it.
Amazing. Thank you so much. For everyone that joined the webinar, thank you so much. The video is up on YouTube. This will be coming out in the podcast shortly, and we'll definitely keep everyone updated, and we'll be posting it all over social media when it does. Thank you so much, Kevin, again. Thanks, everyone, for joining. Talk to you guys soon.
All right.
Thanks, Kevin. Have a great day.
All right. Bye-bye.